The time was 7:06 in the morning. The sky over Bass Strait, the narrow, treacherous stretch of water separating mainland Australia from the island of Tasmania, was clear. Visibility was good. There was no storm. No reported mechanical failure. No distress call. Frederick Valentich, a 20-year-old licensed pilot, had been in the air for 47 minutes. And then, in the middle of a routine radio exchange with air traffic control in Melbourne, something happened. Something that has never been explained. Melbourne Flight Service Unit, October 21, 1978. 1906. The last words transmitted by Frederick Valentich were recorded by Australian Air Traffic Control and preserved in official documentation. According to those records, Valentich reported an unidentified aircraft flying above him. One that he could not identify, one that was not responding, one that moved in ways he described as unlike anything he had ever seen. Then he said something that has puzzled investigators for nearly 5 decades. It is not an aircraft. 17 seconds of metallic scraping noise followed. Frederick Valentich was never found. His aircraft was never recovered. No wreckage. No body. No explanation. The records survived. The explanation did not. To understand what happened that evening over Bass Strait, you first have to understand who Frederick Valentich was. Born on June 9, 1958, in the city of Ballarat, Victoria, Australia, Frederick, known to friends and family simply as Fred, had grown up with an almost singular obsession: flight. By his early 20s, he had accumulated over 150 hours of flying experience, enough to qualify for a Class 4 instrument rating. He was, by all accounts, a careful and enthusiastic pilot. Not reckless. Not inexperienced for his age. Someone who took aviation seriously. He was also, according to people who knew him, deeply interested in the unexplained. Historical accounts describe Valentich as an avid reader of UFO literature, a fact that investigators would later scrutinize with particular attention. He had reportedly applied twice to join the Royal Australian Air Force and been rejected both times, citing academic performance. He was working toward a commercial pilot's license, flying part-time while continuing his studies. On the night of October 21, 1978, he filed a flight plan for a short training exercise. He would fly his rented Cessna 182L, registration VHDSJ, from Moorabbin Airport in Melbourne to King Island, a small landmass in the middle of Bass Strait, approximately 235 kilometers away. The purpose of the flight, he told officials, was to pick up a load of crayfish for friends. It was a routine trip. Estimated flight time, approximately 75 minutes. He departed at 18:19 local time. He would never land. But what happened in the 47 minutes between takeoff and silence was far stranger than anyone anticipated, and the deeper investigators looked, the less certain they became about almost everything. Because Frederick Valentich wasn't just any young pilot with an interest in the unknown. He was also, according to some who knew him, someone who had told people, in the weeks before his disappearance, that he was afraid of being abducted. The question was never whether he believed that. The question was what actually happened to him. Bass Strait has a reputation. Among Australian pilots and mariners, it is known as one of the most unpredictable bodies of water in the Southern Hemisphere. The strait sits at the convergence of multiple weather systems, and conditions can shift without warning. Dozens of ships have sunk in its waters. Numerous aircraft have gone down over it. But on the evening of October 21, 1978, none of that seemed relevant. The conditions were near ideal. Official meteorological records from that evening indicate clear skies, calm winds at altitude, and excellent visibility. Valentich was flying at approximately 4,500 feet. The sun had not yet fully set. The water below was visible. At 1900 hours, 41 minutes into his flight, he made routine radio contact with Melbourne Flight Service Unit. Controller Steve Roby was on duty. The exchange was unremarkable. 6 minutes later, everything changed. At 1906, Valentich contacted Roby again. His tone, according to the official transcript of the transmission, was measured but clearly concerned. He reported that there was an aircraft flying above him. Large, he said, and moving fast. He asked Roby to confirm whether any known traffic was operating in his area. Roby checked. There was nothing. No registered aircraft in that sector. Valentich pressed further. He described the object as having 4 bright landing lights. He said it had passed over him at high speed. Then he reported that it was approaching again, this time from the east. Then it was orbiting above him. Then it was sitting on top of him, stationary. And then Valentich said something that stopped the transmission cold. It's not an aircraft. According to the official Australian Department of Transport Accident Investigation report, published in May 1982, the entire exchange between Valentich and Roby lasted approximately 6 minutes and 30 seconds. During that time, Valentich described the object changing directions, disappearing, reappearing, and performing maneuvers that he could not explain. The engine, he reported, had begun to run roughly. And then, after those 17 seconds of metallic scraping, the line went dead. No mayday. No final position. No impact. Just silence. The search that followed would cover thousands of square kilometers of ocean and find almost nothing. In the days that followed Frederick Valentich's disappearance, Australian authorities launched one of the largest aerial and maritime searches in the country's history at that time. Aircraft, ships, Coast Guard vessels, dozens of personnel combing hundreds of square kilometers of ocean. They found nothing. No wreckage, no fuel slick, no debris, no body. For investigators, that absence was already unusual. A Cessna 182L impacting the ocean at low altitude, even under controlled conditions, would typically leave some recoverable material. Seat cushions, instrument panels, sections of the fuselage. The ocean found nothing to give back. But it was not the absence of wreckage that most troubled investigators. It was one specific detail buried inside the official transcript of Valentich's final transmission. According to the documented exchange, at one point during the encounter, Valentich described the unidentified object as having a shiny metallic surface. He said it was elongated. He said it was moving with him, matching his speed, his altitude, his direction, before suddenly accelerating away. None of that, by itself, was enough to constitute an anomaly. Pilots misidentify aircraft. Unusual atmospheric conditions can distort the appearance of lights and objects. The human mind, under stress, is not always a reliable instrument. But here is the detail that made no sense. According to Australian Department of Transport records, a ground-based witness, located near Cape Otway, approximately 30 kilometers north of Valentich's last known position, reported seeing a fast-moving, brightly lit object traveling southward over the water at approximately the same time as the radio transmissions. That report, filed independently and without knowledge of the Valentich transmissions at the time, was logged, documented, and then largely set aside during the primary investigation. It was not the only such report that evening. Historical records suggest that at least 5 additional witnesses in the Bass Strait region reported unusual aerial phenomena on the night of October 21, 1978, all within a similar time window. The investigation never formally connected those reports to Valentich's disappearance. And that choice, what was included in the official record and what was not, would become one of the most contested aspects of the entire case. The formal search for Frederick Valentich began within hours of the transmission ending. By October 22, the Australian Department of Transport had mobilised aircraft from the Royal Australian Air Force, the Civil Aviation Authority, and private operators. Ships from the Royal Australian Navy were redirected to assist. The search zone was initially defined as a 1,000 square kilometre area centred on Valentich's last known position. Over the following 4 days, that zone was expanded twice. The search covered more than 1,500 square kilometers of open water. It found nothing. On October 25, 1978, 4 days after the disappearance, the formal search was suspended. Officials stated publicly that the likelihood of finding survivors was negligible. The aircraft was presumed lost. Valentich was presumed dead. His body was never recovered. His aircraft was never located. But then, 9 days after the search was officially suspended, a discovery was made. On November 3, 1978, a small section of a light aircraft cowling was found washed ashore on Flinders Island, located at the eastern end of Bass Strait. The piece was forwarded to investigators for analysis. The conclusion, after examination: inconclusive. The cowling could not be definitively linked to VHDSJ, Valentich's Cessna. It could not be definitively excluded either. The fragment disappeared into the archive. For the families, for the investigators, and for the aviation community, the suspension of the search did not close the case. It simply moved it into a different kind of darkness, the slow, grinding uncertainty of an investigation with no body, no wreckage, and no explanation. And that investigation, when it finally published its findings 4 years later, would raise more questions than it answered. When the Australian Department of Transport released its official accident investigation report in May 1982, nearly 4 years after Valentich vanished, the document was notable for what it did not conclude. The cause of the disappearance, the report stated, could not be determined. In the absence of a definitive answer, investigators, journalists, aviation experts, and the general public have proposed a range of hypotheses over the decades that followed. Some are grounded in physics and documented meteorology. Others venture into territory that mainstream science does not formally recognize. All of them, to varying degrees, fail to account for every element of the case. The first hypothesis: spatial disorientation. Some aviation safety experts have suggested that Valentich, flying at dusk over a dark expanse of water with few visual reference points, may have experienced a form of spatial disorientation, a well-documented phenomenon in which a pilot loses accurate perception of the aircraft's orientation relative to the ground. Under this theory, what Valentich described as an external craft may have been the reflection of his own aircraft's lights on the water below, or on an unusual atmospheric layer. The hypothesis is technically plausible. It does not explain the witness reports from the ground. The second hypothesis: deliberate disappearance. A number of investigators have noted that Valentich had, on paper, certain personal difficulties at the time of his disappearance: failed RAAF applications, financial pressures, and what some described as an intensifying interest in fringe ideas. Some researchers have proposed that Valentich staged his own disappearance, landing the Cessna on a remote beach or coastline and walking away. Historical records do not support this theory with any physical evidence. No aircraft was found on any coastline. No trace of Valentich was found on King Island or elsewhere. No activity traceable to him was ever documented after October 21. Aerial collision or structural failure. Some aviation analysts have proposed that Valentich may have encountered another aircraft, unregistered, flying without proper lighting, possibly engaged in illegal activity such as drug smuggling, and that a collision or near collision caused his Cessna to go down. The metallic scraping sound at the end of the transmission, under this theory, was the sound of the aircraft in its final moments. This hypothesis remains unverified. No second aircraft was ever identified. And then there is the hypothesis that no official report has ever formally addressed, but that tens of thousands of people across the world have never stopped discussing. Over the decades since 1978, portions of the official documentation surrounding the Valentich case have been made available through Australian Freedom of Information requests and archival releases. What those documents reveal is not a conspiracy. There is no evidence of official concealment, manipulation, or deliberate suppression of the case. What they reveal is something perhaps more unsettling: an investigation that reached its limits honestly, documented its uncertainty transparently, and arrived at no answer. But there are specific elements within those documents worth examining carefully. The witness reports, collected from at least 6 independent parties on the night of October 21, 1978, describe a consistent pattern: a brightly lit, fast-moving object traveling over Bass Strait in a southward direction, during the same narrow time window as Valentich's transmissions. These reports were filed independently. The witnesses did not know each other. They were located at different points along the coastline. The original radio transcript, preserved by the Australian Department of Transport, has been analysed by voice stress experts on multiple occasions. According to those analyses, referenced in secondary historical literature though not formally part of the official investigation, Valentich's voice patterns during the transmission showed no signs of deliberate deception. He appeared, to those analysts, to be describing something he was genuinely observing. There is also one detail in the documentation that rarely receives attention. According to flight records, Valentich's Cessna was not equipped with an emergency locator transmitter capable of underwater activation. The ELT onboard VHDSJ was an older model, designed to activate on impact, effective primarily on land. In an ocean impact scenario, its signal may never have been detectable. Which means that even if the aircraft went down intact, the systems designed to locate it may simply have never worked. The ocean kept the plane. The archive kept the questions. And nearly 5 decades later, neither has given anything back. Frederick Valentich would be 67 years old today. His file remains officially open in Australian aviation records. His disappearance is classified not as confirmed death, but as a missing person case, suspended, unresolved, unanswered. The 6 minutes and 30 seconds of radio transmission he left behind have been studied by aviation authorities, acoustic engineers, psychologists, historians, and researchers across more than 40 countries. No one has produced a definitive explanation. The metallic scraping sound, those 17 seconds at the end of the recording, has been analyzed repeatedly. Some acoustic experts have described it as consistent with interference from an unknown electromagnetic source. Others have suggested it resembles the sound of a throttle being cut. No consensus has ever been reached. What is known, what the record unambiguously confirms, is this: a licensed pilot, flying in clear conditions over a well-charted body of water, vanished without a trace. No mechanical failure was detected in the pre-flight inspection. No weather event was recorded in the area. No distress signal was received beyond the transmissions themselves. No wreckage was ever confirmed. And in his final conscious moments of radio contact, that pilot described something above him that he could not identify, and said, clearly, that it was not an aircraft. Some historians have quietly noted that the Bass Strait area has one of the highest concentrations of unresolved aerial disappearances in the Southern Hemisphere. Whether that is statistical coincidence, the product of the Strait's notoriously difficult flying conditions, or something else entirely, the record does not say. What the record says is simpler, and in many ways more difficult to sit with. A young man took off on a clear evening. He saw something he couldn't explain. He told someone. And then he was gone. The transmission is preserved. The questions are preserved. Frederick Valentich is not. And somewhere beneath the cold gray waters of Bass Strait, or perhaps somewhere else entirely, whatever truth exists about that night in October 1978 remains exactly where it has always been.